away from Kfar Saba. And the third thing, we talked about the loss of manpower, and now we're going to talk, we talked about the loss of land, and all these economic losses are a matter of choice. In other words, we chose not to impose sovereignty over territories that we relate to as ours, but not legally. So of course, legally relating to them as legally ours could change the way consumers and buyers relate to it. The loss of capital is a very large loss that isn't usually counted. When there is social order, there is the right of property, and this is not enforced in Judea and Samaria. Many people who talk about civil rights, and civil rights is a term used by leftist organizations, and when they talk about civil rights, they're not really talking about solutions for hundreds of thousands of people who are really in distress in Judea and Samaria, and no solution that the left proposes is a real solution for Arabs in Judea and Samaria. Not that I am their representative and I want to work on their behalf, but clearly the imposition of sovereignty is a good one for the three economic parameters that I have mentioned here for the Arabs of Judea and Samaria too, because one thing for sure will happen to them. They will have a right of property the way it appears in Israeli law. What that did in South America in a very short time was it raised the market value of assets in general. And you can't even talk about it in percentage points because it was zero before. Because when the land doesn't belong to you, when it's not registered in your name, you cannot leverage its value. You can't go to the bank and get a mortgage for your house. So your house basically has no value. But when you enforce the right of property, and it is enforced on both Jews and Arabs, so you are giving them the possibility to raise money against the value of the land, and that is a loss of capital that is today happening. Even wealthy people have a very weak stock market among the Palestinians, but even the wealthy Palestinians, and there are wealthy Palestinians, nobody puts his money into banks that the state of Israel makes anything out of. And it wasn't that way always, and it doesn't have to be that, because the economic market doesn't work according to ideology. It works according to prices. And when people realize that it's worth their while, they will invest their money where it's worth their while. And if they invest their money, so we're talking about a multiple of land value. You can multiply it by the number of Arab households in Judea and Samaria times the land value, whatever is determined, that is capital that can be managed by the state of Israel. In all these different areas, this is an economic loss. I spoke to a number of economists before this conference, and I asked them, how can we discuss this in terms of the economic losses in relation to the matter of sovereignty, imposing sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. Not one of them could think of one economic thing that we would lose as a result of that, including the need to invest in infrastructures in Judea and Samaria, because the investment in infrastructures in Judea and Samaria and everywhere else, like everywhere else, is an excellent investment, one on which there is a very high return. Certainly, if we count the profit of the very high value in terms of land, that we are lowering their price when we don't send people who are suffering from a housing shortage in Judea and Samaria, when we don't send them to Spain. When we choose to lose those things, it is nothing compared to the cost that is required, the price that is required to invest in infrastructures in Judea and Samaria. I don't want to complicate you with too many more figures. I suggest at this point to open the floor to questions. We have time for 3 questions. I'd like to say one thing. I don't know exactly how to make it into a question, but there is now a housing protest, and it turns out that a significant reason for it is the building freeze in Judea and Samaria, which is raising the price of housing. And I call upon the right in Israel to go to those 10 cities and to leverage the housing protests to explain to the public that it is because of the freeze, because of the left, and because we are giving in to the Arabs. That's why young people don't have anyone. We have to strike when the iron is hot. And the question is, what do we need to do about that? Are there any questions? Any other questions? But I wanted to say something similar. But anyone who remembers the bankruptcy of the Heftzibah construction company, one of the reasons for that was that the company built hundreds of housing units in Modi'in Illit, and Peace Now, under the sponsorship of the High Court of Justice, halted the construction, and that caused terrible losses to that company. But if you see, we're always embarrassed. We don't talk about the economic price, which is something that anywhere else in the world would be more convincing than ideological reasons when you talk to the public in general. Money talks. Let me give you an example. In the United States, the Republicans did a study, and they discovered that every $6,000 that a family has that is on the stock market raises the chances by tens of percentage points that they will be a Republican. So there's a very strong connection between having money invested in the stock market and your political position. This is something that has been studied in many different countries, and we ignore it. But young people will certainly be convinced by an argument related to the housing shortage and the housing solutions that are right under our nose, and nobody talks about them in terms of housing solutions. It seems we're like embarrassed about it. Instead of what? Instead of Abraham, we're going to talk about our bank accounts? Yes, the bank account is very convincing, and I can tell you from experience in places, not in Hebron, but in other places in Israel. It's a very convincing argument. I'm sorry, I can't hear her. You discussed Adam Smith. It started from the idea from Jewish law that the poor people of your own city come first. I've heard many lectures from rabbis who support this basic assumption. What I said wasn't new, but in public discourse we're embarrassed to say that. And we are apologetic that we're not supporting human rights wherever, and we prefer to support the welfare of Jews. And it's important to talk about it, about that, and about the economic aspect. Thank you for listening.